What is the importance of editing within the animation process?
Okay, for me, editing is absolutely vital in a storytelling sense. Finalize the order of shots, the pace, the tone of a piece. It can add drama, it can add comedy. There's beats, there's special beats that you put in that you don't see in the script that you have to have in the timing, and that is where it comes in vitally in terms of timing. But also, if you have a good editor, they know story and they can advise and they can steer the story as they see it into a slightly different direction, maybe unexpected.
Well, yeah, for me, I agree with all of those points. This is going to be a very boring podcast if we keep agreeing. But anyway, there you go. Um, I, for me, it's a fundamental foundation point. I think it's where all of that pre-production element of script writing, storyboarding, the voice record, it comes together. And I always think that at that point, I make the program. When we make the animatic, we make the program. And then all that's left to do is to actually animate it. I think, it's another aspect working in television series work. You've obviously got to work to a time frame. Most programs have a set time frame of, whatever it is, 11 minutes or 22 minutes. And so you have to make the actual storytelling that you've got work within that frame, that timing. And that's something that you can really only do at that point, I think, at the animation, at the editing point. And it's really good today because if we're talking about editing animation, we have a guest today, don't we, Stuart?
We do. We do
You-
a very, very special guest, very well known to us. We will introduce him later after the theme.
Hello, I'm Dave Osborne, and I've been directing animation for over 30 years. Recently, I directed Super Team 4, Nexo Knights, Mr. Bean, the animated television series. How about you, Stuart?
I am Stuart Evans, and I have been directing for nearly 30 years. Very much the junior partner here. My biggest show has been Bob the Builder, series and feature, and I've done many series in 2D and CGI over the years. And they are available on all streaming platforms and broadcast. Today's special guest, yes, Dave, I know you can't wait, is known to us. He is the
No.
star of stage, screen, and
I,
animation.
I once had to confess in the last 15 years, I suspect I've spent more time with him than my wife.
Than your wife has, or than your wife?
Than my wife. Not my wife has spent more time with him. We better actually just tell everybody and get on with it. Adam Dymond.
So Adam has been editing for over 20 years. In that time, he has carved a niche in animation storytelling, with notable work including the latest series of Mr. Bean with Dave here, Disney's African anthology series Kizazimoto, the new Bob the Builder, and shows for Lego. Adam, describe the job of an editor as you see it.
Well, I think you both summed it up really nicely in your introduction. Essentially, the role of an editor is to safeguard the story as we see it developing. So we've had the script. We in animation we have a storyboard, but in live action, of course, you've got your footage. And the what I'm usually trying to do is to make sure that we're using those elements to tell the story in the strongest possible way and staying faithful to the original intent, both of the writer and what the director wants to do with the material.
And so the importance of an animatic, we know as directors how important it is to us. So we see it very much as an evolution of the story, but of the script to the storyboard to the editing and the animatic. So would you agree that that's with the whole thing is a process of evolution of the story right from the very start, and it just becomes something else as the process goes on?
Oh, absolutely. I think as with any creative endeavor, you start with an idea, and the reason that we form a crew and get different people with different expertise involved is to encourage that evolution. It may be like in design terms, there may be a concept designer who's giving you some broad sketches of what they imagine the show might look like. But then we'll bring in other designers with other specialties, and that will evolve the process. And I think it's similar with editing, in the sense that you will have a script, and that script will have gone through many iterations, especially now when you have different partners involved behind the scenes on things. You'll end up with at least 7 or 8 passes of a script before you get to a lock. And yet that script will then, having been storyboarded and brought into the edit, it will undergo more rewrites as we go along. We often don't kind of acknowledge them quite as rewrites, but we will, where necessary, change dialogue. Scene order will certainly change, as will order of events. But that is, as you said, it's an evolution, and it's about still trying to maintain a key story, but accepting the fact that you might not necessarily have it right first time, if that makes sense. It's like you locked a script, but we do see there's other possibilities that can open up along the way. And at the same time, there are certain avenues that may be slightly dead alleys, and you want to sort of shut those off and choose your focus.
I think it's interesting what you're saying, because I often think, like, especially when we did the Mr. Bean episodes, it's a little bit like a puzzle, and you'll continue, like a crossword puzzle, and you're continually trying to work through all of these clues and fill it all in. Eventually you fill everything in and you think, that's it, we've got it now. Everything is balanced, everything is locked into its correct positions, and it all does what each bit needs to do. But it's not always what it was quite in the script or the storyboard, as we both know. And I think that's the important thing that sometimes isn't acknowledged in the editing process, is that actually you do need to bring those things together, and it is the litmus test of actually making it all work at that point.
On a certain way, I've never thought of it like this before, but in edit you are kind of holding things to account a little bit. So it's, if the script is supposed to be funny, it's when you're in the edit that you're actually saying, is it funny? Or if it's action adventure, is it exciting? Is it boring at this point, is another thing. I think as well that's reflected in the choice of the shots, because the board artists, there's some very talented board artists, will give you some fantastic choices for shots, but sometimes the most cinematic shot or the prettiest shot isn't necessarily the one that's telling the story as you need it to be. And I feel that edit is kind of in that position to sort of say, look, this is great material, but it's not doing what we need it to do. So are we going to keep it? Are we going to lose it? Are we going to do it differently?
Yeah, and then that leads you to have notes, or to do this as you've previously done, to have the start somewhere else, because it doesn't work there, and you have to. Sometimes it's better if you come in halfway through an action sequence and you have an explanatory piece where it's just a little bit gentler. You come in with a big impact, and you're not afraid to just mix things up, because visually it will now work much better.
Yeah, there was
for the drama and the comedy and the pacing.
Absolutely. There was a series I was doing with Dave actually a couple of years back where it was a sort of a mid-series. It was an action adventure show with a mid-series episode that revealed a big plot twist. And that particular scene also included a flashback to things that had gone on before. And the way it was originally scripted, I felt that the energy had been sapped out of the scene, because we sort of had the revelation at the front of the scene, followed by a flashback, followed by some slightly awkward comedy. And it wasn't having the impact it should have. And I can't quite remember how it worked out, but eventually I took all the dialogue and the component parts of that particular scene. And I think the end became the beginning, the middle became the end, and the beginning became the middle, or something like that. If you were moving the blocks around, that was roughly the sort of the change in the structure. And we had a story executive who was sort of overseeing the episodes. We sent that through as a first pass. And what was interesting is that while they came back with notes on the episode, they never commented on that scene at all. And I really wish I had kept the sort of the before and after of those two edits, because that particular scene, I think, really epitomized what edit should be doing. not just in animation, but on any sort of medium. That's the reality of editing. I do feel that it's particularly now, because the edit tools are so accessible to so many people. We've got them on our phones, that I think that people slightly dismiss editing as a sort of technical necessity. It's like, okay, we've got some shots, we now have to stick them together. That's it, we've edited it. And they're not looking at editing as an exercise in storytelling, if that makes sense.
I think historically, editing in animations had a sort of strange history. Certainly, when I started in the late 80s, because it was actually a function on film. You didn't really. I mean, yes, on a television series in the late 80s, early 90s, you didn't really actually edit an animatic. You would just have the storyboard and you'd assemble it on a video, roughly. But the actual timing and the structural work was done in the dope sheets, and you actually worked in that area to actually sort out things like, when things were going to happen within a shot and everything like that. So it's only when, really, as far as I can see from the historic perspective, it's only when the non-linear editing systems came in at the very late 90s, and actually editing became a function that you could be quite destructive with it and change things and mix it around quite a bit without actually costing a massive amount of money or throwing lots of completed animation out the door. Did it really become an integral part of the process in a way that I don't feel it was 30, 40 years ago as it is now?
No, and I think that shows if you watch cartoons from that era, the 80s particularly, well, that's the ones I'm most familiar with, you can actually tell that they haven't had that non-linear editing process, because, as you say, Dave, that it was done with doping and people were preempting how long things were going to take and basically bolt it together. And I watched a show from that era not that long ago, and to be honest, I think it stood up very well. But one thing that really came across to me was the fact there was not a single pause between the dialogue. Because they'd obviously timed the film for the length of the words, and then literally gone straight to the next cut or the next line, as much as anything, probably to save stock. But just today, with that ability to be able to add in a breath, a pause, you can tell the difference, especially if obviously if it's your day job.
Yeah. It is a great luxury. It's a great tool for us all to have as storytellers, to be able to manipulate to that extent, that far into the, although it's not that far into the process, but past the boarding, past the slugging and the working out and the timing, the rough timing, to be able to go back and forth and to change it as much as we need it, as we like. That's a great luxury,
and particularly for comedy.
Oh yeah,
you're doing something. The amount of comedy that depends on a pause or a beat, and I've been doing this a while, and I still couldn't tell you exactly how long that pause or beat is.
Yeah.
But you know it when you've got it. And
timing. See what I did there? Yeah, but that's it. That's essential, and that's where it comes in. With you can't write it in. You can't necessarily write it into a script. You can put beat in the script, but you can't tell, and it's only when you get to the edit and if you, as we're working, as you two have been working on your own films, how long I'm expecting a pause to be before it lands, and we get that shorthand. That's the good thing about working with good editors. And especially like a regular editor who you get, I wouldn't say anything but a regular editor, but someone that you work with on a regular basis or a repeated basis, you do get that kind of shorthand where I could just give you an episode and say, okay, you cut it, and you'll cut it and you'll change it and you'll swap it around. And I'll go, yeah, fine, because I know you're telling the story in a better way.
Well, I think that comes down to trust as well, really. It's both trust and also the director, and it's a difficult thing to do, having to slightly let go, because the way I look at it, when I get especially the first pass is the most important one to me, because that's when I will take the raw materials, and I'm usually left alone to do it. And for that duration, that period, it's mine, and I'll do with it whatever I see fit to tell it in what I can consider to be the most effective way. Because that's completely subject to the fact it's going to be reviewed by the director, it's going to be reviewed by producers and broadcasters. So there's a long way to go, but it's a good opportunity to say, this is the project as I see it. This is how I'm interpreting the instruction and the intent. And then hopefully, if I've done it right, the director is then in the hopefully the luxurious position of being able to fine tune that and to tweak it and embellish it rather than laboriously putting it back together, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I know from our experience of working together, Adam, that, often that pass that you've done, I come along then to see it. And I know in my head, I've usually got some stakeholder information that I'm probably carrying from previous passes of, where people have, said, well, this is really important, or we can't do this because of compliance, or don't be, and then suddenly things, because they've been cut down, they've changed, and we have to bring in that aspect of it as well a little bit, and sort of realign a little bit. But I think then, I agree with you. Then it's a case that we work together. I always think we work together to try and find, if we watched it together and go, oh, that was quite funny, but could it be a bit funnier, or have we missed that gag? And it seemed funny when it was done in the recording. Why is it not working now? And you sort of go through it a little bit. And there are tools that I know that certainly, we use in terms of saying, well, do we need it? That's always a key one to me. It's sort of, you look at something and go, actually, sometimes you just don't need something, and it's causing other problems. It's putting the viewer somewhere else, and taking it out suddenly alleviates that problem, and it all kind of works. And you go,
that's a good point as well, because it's probably worth mentioning for people who may be less familiar with the process. But because these things are done digitally now, nothing really gets thrown away. It's not like the days where you would literally cut film and put it in a bin. If a scene's not working on my first pass, I'll take it out. It exists somewhere on a system. And if we find after a few goes that actually there was something in that we were missing, or sometimes it's the scene itself, and sometimes it's a bit of dialogue from that scene, it's still there on a drive. We can still pull it out and restore it and put it in. So that, for me, that empowers me to kind of make bold choices at times, because it's never final at that point. We do have the room to go forward and back, preferably forward. But it's again, it goes back to what you were saying, Stuart. It's an evolution, and and the fact that we're all going to be chipping in ideas. I think also what's really helpful is the fact that in animation, time is a big factor, in the sense that we usually have to work with very locked episode durations, because we're paying by the frame. And that brings with it a welcome bit of discipline from my point of view, because it's usually quite a good sort of negotiating tool as an editor to be able to say, look, these are all great ideas, but we can't fit them all into the runtime. We're going to have to make some tough choices. Whereas when that sort of limit is removed, then I find indecision starts to creep in, which is usually quite problematic further down the line on production.
Is there a big difference in approach between short and long format projects?
Yes, I think there is, both practical and creative. The obvious is, obviously, if you're telling a story over a longer period of time, there are a lot more things you can do, a lot more nuance and stuff to play with. But for me personally, I tend to approach them in the same way. So if I'm doing a short form, I'll start at the beginning. I'll have an eye on what I imagine the endpoint's going to be, and I will work towards that endpoint. Sometimes I mark it literally on my timeline as this will finish at the 1 minute mark. And the same with longer form. So in my head, I'm working through it the same way, but obviously it's going to be much longer journey. And I think that, you just adjust. But at the end of the day, I'm still telling a story.
Well, how have you found the role of editor differing with different studios?
Yeah, yes, I do, and I find that quite surprising actually, because you would think after 30 years or so, or 20 years of the non-linear platforms being there, you would think that all the studios would have evolved their use of editing to match that. But I do find in animation in particular, studios tend to fall into two camps. There are those who embrace editing kind of in the ways we've been discussing, with the advantages that it brings to the storytelling, the evolving of the script and the final product. And there are those that kind of almost sort of park it into a technical necessity that they're obliged to do. So for those who are unaware, we start with an animatic, which is storyboards and dialogue and effects and music where applicable. And the intention of an animatic is to make a frame accurate blueprint of what the final show will be. And then when that is approved, it will be shared amongst animators who will, as an exec I know calls it, color it in, but they are animating to the timings we've laid down. And that's a very solid use of the edit. I have, over the years, also worked with studios who feel that an animatic is a rough sketch, and dare I say, even a contractual obligation. So it's treated with a little bit more disdain. Get the panels and the voices in, line it up, and let's send it to the broadcaster so they give us the thumbs up. And then we can get on with the interesting stuff, which is animating. And almost always, when I've worked in those situations, those productions have had a lot of problems, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, myself and Dave, we are clearly in the camp of locking it all in at the animatic, and yeah, we are frame specific, and then we move on, and we've got, as you always do with an animatic, that's something important to say about a good editor that I find, that probably Dave agrees with me, that a good editor will add to an animatic, as well as the storytelling, as well as the cutting of the frames and making sure that the pace and the drama is there. You'll also embellish with, hopefully you have the dialogue or temp dialogue that you will add in, or we as directors will add in, and temp music and sound effects, especially with comedy, that we found when we were doing ARPO, that sound effects in comedy, well, they're a lot cheaper to have a load of crashing off screen, and they just give the animators that little key of exactly when that beat is. Because if you haven't got that, you go, okay, well, when do they react? And they won't know. So it's making sure the animators have enough there that they can build on, because we have the main part of we've got the show. We have the show there. And for animators, we know how important animation is. We've both been animators, myself and Dave. Oh, and you, of course. And we know that, yes, the animation part of it is the final thing that you see, but that's giving the animators a solid base, and they can have fun. They can expand on that, and they can add the gravy, which is the loveliness on top of everything. But you have that stable foundation, and then they can have fun. And they do, as an old animator, I appreciate that. You know what your parameters are, you know what the timings are, and you can just have fun.
Well, this is it. And again, this goes back to kind of what I said about the accountability earlier, is, in live action terms, the animators are like having the actors. They give you the performance. Yes, in animation, they're also working in tandem with the actual actors who are providing the voices. But, when you give that character the close-up and the nuance and the expression, that's all down to the animator. But, it would be quite a brave producer who would trust actors to carve the whole thing amongst themselves, because the joke is that all be wrestling for the limelight or whatever, or opening up their close-up or whatever. And And I think that, again, this is where the edit becomes quite invaluable, because you are forced to be disciplined and say, we've got the shot, we've got the look, let's move on. And not waste frames and time using, rendering stuff that isn't going to be used.
Do you feel that the role of the editor has changed since you started?
So just in very practical terms, when I started, storyboards were still being delivered on paper, and somebody would have to shoot them on a rostrum camera and put them in, or scan them and put them into a software, and then the editor would literally start assembling them frame by frame. Software then came in, Storyboard Pro and what have you, so those frames could then be delivered digitally. And in more recent years, it's now possible for storyboard artists to assemble their original board on a timeline as a animatic. And this is essentially acting as the assembly now. And that is very useful in some ways, because time is always against you on production. It also means that the storyboard artist can, when they're working, see how their shots are actually cutting together. And I think that's really valuable. It also means that when I open up their project, I can at least see what their intent was. But I think there is a bit of a danger of mission creep, that there are some people who are treating that as it's an edit. And I think that is a problem. So if anything has changed over the years, I would say that it's probably that there's people questioning why are we doing this editing thing when it can all be sort of automated. And I'll be honest, I think people who creatively know what they're doing, it's not an issue. It's not even a question. But I do think that where people are sort of managing budgets and time and stuff, it's beginning to become a repeated question that concerns me.
I mean, I certainly remember when, it's the program, and I'm sure there's others out there, Storyboard Pro began to have this function where you could actually assemble your shots together on a timeline. I felt personally, when the storyboarders that I was working with started to use that, their boarding improved, in the sense that they understood more of the continuity that was going on. They were able to sort of pace things a little bit better, I found, that they could actually determine how many shots they needed within an idea. All of that seemed to sort of, in my own view, my personal view, it got better from where it was when it was purely a function on paper, and the boarder really was kind of having to, it was a slightly more, they were further away from the ideas in that sense.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's when it's working at its best. My issue would be that whilst that's improved, it doesn't do anything to improve overall story, if that makes sense.
No, I take that and accept that. I think one thing I feel that the role that you play within the process is that, we have, if we're making a television series, you will have multiple writers, you will have multiple storyboard artists, and actually the function of the edit, it does funnel it in, and it does allow us to actually homogenize some of the aspects that we have, because when you have different writers, different boarders, sometimes different directors, as we know as well, working on the same show, is that it does allow us to actually sort of, through that process, kind of balance it out and make it feel consistent. Because I think often for an audience, that's important. Most television series, the audience expect a sense of consistency across it when they watch it, a sense that whilst you want each story to be unique and have its own life in that sense and world, it does need to feel like it's part of something, a bigger thing as well. And I think that process of editing does it helps to achieve that.
Yeah, I think consistency is a really good point, actually, because on a series, that consistency manifests in quite a few different ways as well. It's not, part of it is creative, it's the style and the tone, but also there's not quite technical, but it's the presentation. Like let's just take Mr. Bean as an example. It was not a show where we used whip pans to move from one scene to another, whereas there's other comedy shows and action adventure shows where you do it without thinking, and it's just about building up, I suppose, a certain sort of house style in your head. You don't want to be locked to rules. That's always a bit of a problem as well. But you do want to kind of feel this is how we do this show.
So what if people want to be an editor, a professional editor, what advice would you give them to bring their standard up to what you perceive as a professional level?
Well, I think the one thing to do is to watch other shows, watch things that are akin to what you're working on, and to very brutally compare your work to what you're watching. I mean, when I was young as a student making stuff, I was forever wrestling with why my stuff didn't look like the stuff on the telly. And you have to sometimes almost look at it forensically, frame for frame, shot for shot. And I think the main danger is a lot of people who are editors are actually assemblers. And it's about learning the leap between putting things together in a way that plays back nicely and learning the rhythms of a story. I always try. I don't know if this is a good metaphor, but I always come back to sort of like a conductor and orchestration, because you can have the same tune and the same instruments playing, but it's the conductor who's controlling the rhythm and the flow of it. And that, for me, is sort of what an editor's doing. And it's a hard thing to learn because it's quite instinctive. So I think it's just something you've just got to keep doing, and you've got to be quite self-critical in order to kind of finesse that. I often find that when I worked on something, even though I stand by the work I've done, there's usually about a 2-week honeymoon period when I can sort of watch that show. And then afterwards, I've sort of moved on, and I find it difficult to watch because I'm already thinking about how I would do it differently.
Yeah.
And I think that's I think that's the same with any creative thing. I don't think it's just editing as such, but I feel that it's that sort of, again, I'm coming back to that word accountability again. It's holding yourself to account and pushing yourself all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like you. We're all like you, that we look back on stuff that we've done in the past and say, yeah, that was fine for what I knew then, but I've built up my library of knowledge and skills and expertise, so I know I would do it differently then. But we have to just lock it away and say, okay, that was part of the learning process. But it's not something. It's what you're basically saying is it's not something you can learn in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. It's the experience of absorbing everything, absorbing all the different influences, and being self-critical and being able to say, you know what, that's not good enough, bin it, start again.
Yeah, and also a term I keep using when talking about studio environments is the osmosis as well. It's like when you're working with a director, you get used to what that director likes and you get a shorthand for them. But what I like to pick up on is sort of they'll all have a slightly different sense of timing in some people like the comedy to play snap, 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 and others like to play out the awkwardness and accentuate different things. And you tailor what you're doing to suit that particular taste. But in theory, it should all be going up here as well. And you should be learning from those experiences. And then when you're on the next project and someone's saying, well, this scene's not quite working, you will remember something you've done before and go, well, let's try a slightly different approach. I did this thing once where, and you can at least pitch that idea in there. It's just another tool in your sort of bag, really, of what you can do.
I mean, something I would recommend to anybody who's interested in editing or directing or any of that side of it is read scripts. get hold of scripts and read scripts, because at some point you will need, if you're involved in what any of us have been doing in the last God knows how many years, but you will need to look at scripts, and you will need to understand the script and what it's offering you as a creative, and what the intent of the writer was. And I think that's something you're very good at, Adam, in terms of actually, when we've got stuck on things, it's kind of, where's the script? Let's pull this. What was the idea? What's been lost? What's gone down the pan, and we've missed something here. And that was quite it's quite often something that we've had to do, is go back in and look to see what it was, the intent, and why is it not functioning. And I think that was something, working with you, I think you're always very good at doing, and without any kind of me actually even sort of saying, oh, we need to do this, you'll go and do that on your own initiative, and look back at where it's come from, where an idea was. And I think that's something, if you want to elevate what you do, you have to look at those key function areas, like scripting in particular, I believe.
Yeah, and I think again, what we keep coming back to and circling back to is storytelling. The fundamental purpose of making any program or show or film is to tell a story. And it's amazing how much that can kind of get diluted sometimes, whether it's because people realize they can do a big set piece action wise, or really push the art direction and the style. And people get very excited about these things. It's sort of like a big sort of adrenaline hit to see all this beautiful stuff on the screen. But ultimately, it's going to come down to the story, and it will be judged on the story. I think audiences have got quite brutal over the years about storytelling, probably because there's so much eye candy out there. Television and film has arguably never looked better because the equipment and the resources to make things look really beautiful has probably never been more available, and yet. The fact that the story themselves is what people are coming back to, and that's what they're judging things on. So I don't think you can ever underestimate it. And again, that's where the editing really should shine, I think.
So what other creative outlets have you had?
Well, I started making films and stuff when I was still at college, and carried that through to university. And it was whilst an extracurricular activity, it got noticed within the university, and my student films essentially were what opened the door for me to get into the industry at an early stage. I kind of fell into editing in the sense that I think there was probably an opportunity to work in an editorial department, and because I had the storytelling experience from my own work, I got to edit some shows quite quickly. And then I think it just sort of developed from there, really. I felt that when I got into doing animation, initially the show was action adventure, and they wanted a live action sensibility in the pacing. And so I was not a bad fit for that. And then I think really just sort of I've enjoyed the stories that become available through animation, if that makes sense. I think that I do live action work, but I've done more and more animation as time's gone on. And I feel that for me, the opportunity to tell the stories that have been done in animation are just more interesting than the ones that have been coming along in live action. I've done comedy with the Mr. Bean, but I've done action adventure on many occasions, and those particular series have always been fun to work on because they are like a mini movie. The scale of the story and the set pieces. So I would much rather be telling those stories than some of the more sort of domestic scenes that tend to come with a lot of live action work.
Do you have a favorite animated film or TV show?
Well, I think you've got to give a bit of a shout out to Wallace and Gromit, because I think they just do fantastic. It's fantastic filmmaking. I think everyone has a lot of affection for those characters and for the world they've created and the stories they tell. But the filmmaking is just superb. And I was watching I think it's the Hollywood Roundtable director discussions. It was a few years back now, but the directors who had been nominated for that year's Oscars were talking about action and how they control rhythm. And I think it was Quentin Tarantino cited The Wrong Trousers, the train sequence at the end of The Wrong Trousers, as being a superb example of controlling momentum and building across to a big sort of crescendo. And that is something that they always think about when they're doing a set piece like that. So I would probably say the Wallace and Gromit quadrilogy. Is it 4 or 5?
Yeah, 4, I think. Yeah,
Wow.
I think The Wrong Trousers is possibly one of the most perfect films there is. I don't, it's just got every element just right as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I struggle actually to choose between The Wrong Trousers and A Close Shave. Actually, whichever one I'm watching at the time, I always think is the better one.
There's 2 big questions.
Yeah,
2 big questions that are very, very important. Okay, are you ready for this?
Uh-oh.
Tea or coffee?
Oh, coffee, absolutely. I've just been drinking a mug as we've been speaking.
And the second big question: what's the best thing to have on toast?
Honey, I'm going to say.
Honey, right? Okay, interesting.
Well, that was our knockout questions.
They're the big ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to write these down in the big book.
Well, look, that seems like a good place to leave it all. I'd just like to thank Mr. Adam Dymond, our guest this week, for a very insightful view of editing in animation. Or is it? Yes, that's the correct way of putting it. Editing in animation. Yes, thank you very much for that. So, look, hoping to see you soon at some point, and thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been fun.
So if you've enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe as always. And remember that we're not saving lives.
It's just a cartoon. See you next time.
Bye.